Hi, I'm Mark Sleboda, and this is the Real Politik. The cries have risen up shrilly as one across the Western mainstream media, commentariat, and governments alike. Everything that the collective West has supplied to the Kiev regime in Ukraine, more than 120 billion taxpayer dollars worth of military aid and support in the last year alone, is not enough. At Davos, in front of the golden billionaire elite and the governments they own. At Ramstein, where the increasingly frantic Western defense ministries huddle. Zelensky demands of them in increasingly insistent and plaintive tones, like some horribly monstrous toddler that can never, ever be satisfied. More!
And I can thank you hundreds of times, and it will be absolutely just and fair given all that we have already done. But hundreds of thank you are not hundreds of thanks. All of us can use thousands of words in discussions, but I cannot put words instead of guns that are needed against Russian artillery, or instead of the anti-aircraft missile that are needed to protect people from Russian airstrikes. And I am truly grateful to all of you for the weapons you have provided. Every unit helps to save our people from terror, but time remains a Russian weapon. Your power to make a Ramstein of tanks, not to bargain about different numbers of tanks, but to open a principled supply that will stop Russian evil. And we also count that your next gatherings will go down in history as Ramstein of F-16 and long-range missiles.
The Kiev regime's military chief, General Zaluzhny, laid out what the Kiev regime needs and demands of the West in detailed terms. I need 300 tanks, 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 howitzers. Never mind that such numbers of military hardware is more than the total armored forces of most European armies altogether. And another 100,000 conscripts for the meat grinder as well, it seems, from the newly announced umpteenth wave of mobilization.
Люди, дивіться, що коїться, в армію забирають, насильно! Не чіпай дитину! Пустіть!
The Kiev regime needs another new army. A non-sheeple, astute observer, despite the inundation with propaganda about Ukraine winning, might pause at this moment and wonder where their previous army went and why they need another if they are winning. The Kiev regime's first army that they started 2022 out with was the second largest in Europe, only after Russia, according to Western military assessments, and included some 250,000 active-duty troops and a large arsenal of capable Soviet legacy military hardware, some 2,600 tanks, 14,000 armored vehicles, 3,000 artillery pieces, 500 multiple-launch rocket systems, 90 ballistic missiles, nearly 1,000 total air defense systems, over 300 military aircraft, and a large drone fleet. This army had been built up for 8 years with NATO funding and training and was dug into heavy fortifications and trenches constructed over the same period. That military was largely destroyed by Russian forces by the summer. The Kiev regime's second army, cobbled together during the first half of 2022 by NATO states, consisted of the tattered remnants of the first, as well as pretty much the entire remaining Soviet legacy arsenal of the former East Bloc countries that have since joined NATO, like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czech, Slovakia, etc. Their weapons were the best and most suitable logistically for Kiev regime troops because they already know how to use and repair them and had parts stocks for them as well. This included over 400 more tanks, at least 300 infantry fighting vehicles, over 1,000 APCs, dozens more combat aircraft. And all this was peppered with a hodgepodge of Western military gear, including several hundred artillery pieces, including the M777s, over 100 multiple launch rocket systems, including the HIMARS, hundreds of drones, over 10,000 handheld anti-tank guided missiles and anti-aircraft missiles, and more. The Kiev regime claims that its wave of mobilization and mass forced conscription built up a 1,000,000-man army. Thousands of them had received NATO training and had all of NATO's satellites, C4ISR, as well as Pentagon planning and war game provided at their disposal. This second army is now also largely attrited, exhausted, and wasted, having suffered extremely heavy casualty in the Kiev regime's supposedly successful counteroffensives in Kherson and Kharkov in the autumn, suicidally charging across open steppe into superior artillery, rocket systems, and air dominance, while Russian forces, adopting tactics similar to Mongol horse archers, just wheeled about, tactically withdrew, while firing Parthian shots over their shoulders, refusing any major engagement and preserving their own forces. Tens of thousands of Kiev regime troops and their gear in endless waves of reinforcements have also been ground down to dissolution by Wagner's Operation Meat Grinder in Bakhmut, Soledar, and in northern Lugansk. See, the Kiev regime has been fighting a territory-focused, manpower-heavy war of maneuver, while Russia is fighting a classic, coldly calculating, firepower-heavy war of attrition. The grim results are telling. Russia has now taken the kid gloves off the self-limited SMO, at last mobilized for a real war, and begun a new, far more serious winter offensive starting Season 2. The Kiev regime, their toys mostly broken, is desperately screaming for the US and the rest of NATO to provide them with another third army. The regime is now completely dependent on the West for everything. So far, a hodgepodge variety of hundreds more infantry fighting vehicles, over 1,000 more APCs, a couple hundred more artillery pieces, a token number of Western anti-aircraft systems, and a scattering of sundry pledged by the West falls far short of what Zaluzhny says he needs, and far, far short of what the Kiev regime actually started this war with, and has largely lost so far. And with the circus variety of gear from across NATO presenting insurmountable logistical issues for Kiev in terms of training, maintenance, ammunition and parts, and repair. The US and Germany are still bickering and goading each other over who should provide Kiev regime forces with their own modern main battle tanks. But even assuming they will eventually come to some agreement, these Abrams and or Leopards, with huge training and logistical hurdles to overcome, just will never be supplied in enough numbers to compensate for the far higher number of tanks that Kiev has already lost, and it won't change the end results on the battlefield. Russia has explicitly declared that they will burn, just like the rest have. This third Kiev regime army is even more inevitably doomed than the first two were. NATO and its military-industrial complex have been fighting low-intensity counterinsurgency warfare in third-world countries and building expensive high-end boondoggles for decades. They just aren't prepared to fight the type of land-centric, artillery-heavy industrial warfare of attrition that Russia is fighting and has spent decades preparing exactly for in Ukraine. And the West's for-profit corporate defense companies can't wind up production fast enough to make a difference, according to their own admission. The arsenal of democracy is effectively out of business. No matter how much NATO escalates in this proxy war on Russia, here, now, in Russia's own backyard, fighting this kind of war, Russia does and will always have conventional escalation superiority. The US and the rest of NATO have two options left: swallow the humiliation and take the nearest exit ramp out of Ukraine, or double down and take the gamble of directly attacking Russia with all their own military forces and whatever equipment they have left in order to save their proxy client regime in Ukraine without any guarantee of success and risking World War III in the process. Either way, Russia is ready and waiting and not going anywhere.